Israel-Syria relations refers to bilateral ties between Israel and Syria. The two countries have since the establishment of the State of Israel been in a state of war. The countries have fought three major wars, which are the 1948 Arab-Israeli War in 1948, the Six-Day War in 1967, and the Yom Kippur War in 1973, later also being involved in the Lebanese Civil War and the 1982 Lebanon War, as well as the War of Attrition. At other times armistice arrangements have been in place. Efforts have been made from time to time to achieve peace between the neighboring states. Without success, Syria has never recognized the State of Israel and does not accept Israeli passports for entry into Syria. Israel also has regarded Syria as an enemy state and generally prohibits its citizens from going there. There have not been diplomatic relations between the two countries since the creation of both countries in the mid-20th century. There have been virtually no economic or cultural ties between the two countries, and a limited movement of people across the border. Syria continues to be an active participant in the Arab boycott of Israel. Both countries do allow a limited trade of apples for the Golan Druze villages, located on both sides of the ceasefire line, and Syria supplies 10% of the water for the town of Majd al-Shams, near the Syrian border, as a part of an agreement that has been ongoing since the 1980s. The state of peace at the ceasefire line has been strained during the Syrian civil war, which began in 2011 and is ongoing. Since the 1949 armistice agreements, relations between Israel and Syria have been characterized by periods of hostility, ceasefire talks, sometimes through intermediaries, and disengagement agreements, such as the 1974 Israeli-Syrian Disengagement Agreement. Prior to the 1967 Six-Day War, intermittent hostilities centered on the demilitarized zones, water issues and shelling and infiltration from the Golan Heights. Since the war, the focus of negotiations has been land for peace, in particular a demand that Israel return the Golan Heights to Syria along with Syrian recognition of Israel and establishment of peaceful relations with it, as stipulated in UN Security Council Resolution 242. And yet, in the US-brokered Syrian-Israeli talks during the 1990s, Syria demanded that Israeli future withdrawal would be to the June 4, 1967 lines, namely west of the former British Mandate border with Syria. Syria attempted to recover the Golan Heights in the Yom Kippur War, but was unsuccessful, only recovering a small part of it in the 1974 disengagement agreement, while committing to distance its armed forces further eastwards compared with their 1967 to 1973 positions. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon to drive out the PLO. Syria sent ground and air forces to assist the Lebanese, but these were largely routed by the Israelis. Syria continued to support Lebanese militias, leading up to Israel's withdrawal in 2000. The first high-level public talks aimed at a permanent resolution of the conflict between Israel and Syria were held at and after the multilateral Madrid Conference of 1991. Throughout the 1990s, several Israeli governments negotiated with Syria's President Hafez al-Assad. While serious progress was made, they were unsuccessful. High points of hostility in the 2000s included the Ain es-Saab airstrike in 2003 and Operation Orchard in 2007. During the 2006 Lebanon War, Syria threatened to enter the war on Hezbollah's side, provided support to Hezbollah, and allowed Iran to ship supplies to Hezbollah through its territory. Later, Turkey organized peace talks between the two countries, but Syria later withdrew in response to the 2008-2009 Gaza war. The September 2007 Operation Outside the Box attack by the Israeli Air Force destroyed a facility that Israel claimed was a nuclear site in the Deir ez-Zor region. In 2010, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad accused Israel of avoiding peace, and Syrian Foreign Minister Walid Mullaim warned that in the event of a future war, Israeli cities would be targeted by Syrian missiles. Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman responded by saying that the Syrian military would be defeated in a war with Israel. and Assad and his family would be forced from power. Lieberman also advised Syria to let go of the demand for the Golan Heights. For several months in 2010, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel engaged in secret American brokered discussions with Syria. Several incidents have taken place on the Israeli-Syrian ceasefire line during the Syrian civil war, straining the state of peace between the countries. The incidents are considered a spillover of the Quneitra governorate clashes since 2012 and later incidents between the Syrian army and the rebels, ongoing on the Syrian-controlled side of the Golan and the Golan Neutral Zone, and the Hezbollah involvement in the Syrian civil war. Through the incidents, which began in late 2012, as of mid-2014, one Israeli